Hello everyone, Cienter here, and welcome to the Inspiration Magic part of the Mesmer part of the Guild Wars 1 skill review project that I, Cienter, am doing. And today, as I said, or now this video, whatever, we're going over Inspiration Magic. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into it, starting with Auspicious Incantation. This is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 25 second recharge, enchantment spell. For 20 seconds, the next spell you cast is disabled for an additional 6 seconds, and you gain 182% of that spell's energy cost. So when it says you gain 182% of that spell's energy cost, it means you gain that as energy, to be clear. Excuse me. So this is an interesting skill in that it's a sort of energy management skill. It specifically works on the next spell you cast, which I think means if you cast this, then a glyph, you can potentially apply both. I think people did that with some of the elementalist glyphs to get like energy back off of like meteor shower or something, but giving it super long recharge. I don't remember. But anyway, this is an energy management skill. You're going to see a lot of that in Inspiration Magic. A lot of it is energy management. And Auspicious Incantation is a way of basically trading recharge for energy back. So gaining 182% is, I mean, it's basically 80% on top of the skill. So if it's 5 energy, you're gaining 4 back, I think. And on top of that, 5, obviously. So you're gaining 9 energy total. So you probably want to at least use a 10 energy skill, in which case you'd gain 18 energy, because that will pay for Auspicious Incantation. 15 energy is going to be, what? So 4, 4, 4, so about 12 on top of the base cost. It's going to return a good bit, is what I'm saying. This is not a skill that I tend to use a lot. I'm going to give it a 3. I think it's fine for energy management. It's not my go-to energy management. I generally prefer something like Energy Tap or Energy Drain. But, like, it's perfectly serviceable. There are some caveats, like you're not going to want to use this with cheap, fast recharging spells. You're probably going to want to use this with spells that already have like a 20 to 30 second recharge time, where the additional time that this adds isn't a huge deal, and they're more expensive, so you get more energy back out of it. So 3 is maybe a little high. It does require some specific build stuff. I don't know. I'm talking myself into a 2 here. You know what? Yeah, I've talked myself into a 2. A lot of these Mesmer spells have been a little bit harder to evaluate. The reason why I've talked myself into a 2 is because I feel like to actually get good value out of this, you have to be using it with very specific types of spells, which makes it a little bit more finicky. That's mostly what's happened here. Channeling. So channeling is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 15 second recharge enchantment spell for 46 seconds. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 energy for each foe in the area. So in the area is a pretty big area of effect. This is difficult to use on a Mesmer, though, because you usually don't want to be that close to enemies. However, the 46 second duration at 12 inspiration is really high. The recharge is low enough that you can easily afford for this to be much lower. And what that means is that you can use channeling on, say, like a dervish would probably be the best choice. Maybe an assassin if you've got some spells going on, but a dervish is going to get into point blank effect range and cast spells, so that's the profession that's probably going to benefit from channeling the most. I have heard of like monks using it and getting like kind of in the area of things, but that's more of a PvP application and is a little bit tricky to use well. I feel like this is an energy management skill that's a little bit tricky to use just because you have to be near enemies for it to really work. It does not require much investment, so it's not too bad in that regard, but it's the rare situation that actually makes this viable, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a 2. I do think there are situations where it could be useful, but I think that they're a little bit contrived and a little bit challenging to actually get put together. So I think it's, yeah. I think it reads a little bit better than it actually turns out to play, just because the each foe in the area, while a decent-sized AoE, still means you have to be a little bit closer to enemies than you generally want to be. Discharge Enchantment. 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 15 second recharge spell. Remove 1 enchantment from target foe. If that foe is hexed, this skill recharges 44% faster. So this one is interesting. It basically, so 44% faster on top of the fast casting means that this could recharge really, really quickly. 10 energy is kind of expensive. Again, this is being compared to like Mirror of Disenchantment, which we'll talk about later. It's no attribute, but it doesn't have a cost, or something like Drain Enchantment, which is 5 energy. So this feels like a 3 to me. I think of course, you need enemies that you want to remove enchantments from. I think that there's enough competition for enchantment removal that this one's going to have a little bit of a hard time getting in there, if that makes sense. The effect is fine. Like, it does the thing that you want it to do, and it has a nice bonus attached to it. It's a little bit expensive, but, you know, I'm happy, or I'm not unhappy, I should say, to run this as enchantment removal, and I like the option is here. But perhaps some of the options for enchantment removal, there's perhaps more than are really needed, because so the problem is that they're all kind of competing against each other. You only need so much enchantment removal, and so you're looking for things that make them stand out, and recharging faster just doesn't make you stand out enough. So let's move on. Drain Delusions. 5 energy, quarter-second cast time, 12-second recharge, spell. Remove 1 Mesmer Hex from target foe. If a Hex was removed in this way, that foe loses 4 energy, and you gain 4 energy for each point lost. Okay, so what this means is you'll gain 16 energy if they have 4 energy to give. This is kind of the counterpart to Shatter Delusions, and could go on that bar, although you have to be careful you're not stretching yourself too thin on hexes that you're removing for benefit. This one's a little bit more finicky to use. I'm still going to give it a 2. It's pretty, like, it does a thing, and that thing is useful. If you're really being optimal with it, you could use this on other hexes, like an Empathy or something, and remove it, like, a second before it would end anyway to gain energy back. But that's going to be really, really hard to actually manage well. I feel like this one's an okay form of energy management, though. You are trading in a Hex, which you spent energy to place on the enemy, however. So if you're trying to work this with a Hex to gain energy, keep in mind that it's costing you the cost of the Hex as well as the 5 energy for Drain Delusions. So it's not as efficient as it may sound. Yeah. This is definitely the less exciting effect compared to Shatter Delusions, but I can see this working on that bar as a form of energy management, particularly if you have some sort of Hex that you're spreading around to everyone that you may want to end early or something, something like that. Note that it does have to remove Mesmer Hexes, though, so you can't do something like one of the Necromancer Hexes that you might want to end early. Drain Enchantment. 5 energy, 2-second cast time, 20-second recharge, spell. Remove an enchantment from target foe. If an enchantment is removed, you gain 15 energy and 104 health. This one is a 4. If I'm going into Inspiration Magic, there's a decent chance that Drain Enchantment's going to come along. And I'm not necessarily going to go into Inspiration for Drain Enchantment, but when I do go into Inspiration, I like to bring it, if that makes sense. This is enchantment removal that also benefits you, right? If you successfully remove an enchantment, you will gain 15 energy, so that's 10 energy over the cost of the spell, and gain some health. The health gain is less important for this. It's more about the energy gain. So this is a skill that does something beneficial and functions as a bit of a energy restoring move, energy management, and it's always really nice when you can package those things together. And the fact that this is net negative energy costs to you, if it actually does its job, is a huge benefit, and something that, you know, is a reason why you'd want to bring this. So this is definitely a more solid option, and I like that they provide this option. Obviously, it has a longer cast time than most enchantment removal at 2 seconds instead of 1, and it does take a little bit longer to recharge. A lot of the recharge times are about 15 seconds, so 20 is a little bit on the longer side. But the effect that it comes with is a nice trade-off for that. So, elemental resistance. So this is 10 energy, 20-second recharge. It is a stance, which is why there was no activation time. For 78 seconds, you gain plus 40 armor against elemental damage, which 40 armor, for a reminder, is enough armor to have the damage that you take from elemental sources. But you lose 14 armor against physical damage. This is generally not worth it. Yes, you're trading a bit of armor against physical damage for increased armor against elemental damage, and the amount that you're losing against physical damage is significantly less. You could theoretically run this with a ranger bringing Greater Conflagration. Greater Conflagration is a ranger's elite skill that sets up an area effect that makes all physical damage fire type, which then this would protect against. The main issue here is, as I've already established, a lot of damage is armor ignoring, which means that this doesn't help against that. You're using a skill slot on it. You'll take slightly more damage against physical sources. The damage mitigation is fine. I feel like this is a 2. I can see there being times or configurations where you want this, but honestly, a lot of the time it feels like it's a waste of a skill slot. In general, bringing these self-defensive options like elemental resistance, and there's physical resistance that we'll see later, is just not the best choice, just because it's better to rely on some of the monk protection stuff that can directly reduce damage, or something like Watch Yourself on the warrior, which gives you just a general buff to armor, things like that. There are other options that help the entire party. This skill only helps you, and when there's other skills that can help anyone, they're a lot better than a skill that only helps you most of the time. So that's a powerful consideration. That said, this does have a really long duration, and there are instances where I could see wanting to have additional armor like this against elemental damage. That said, and while you could build to make that the case where everything's elemental damage, and thus you could like have your entire party with elemental resistance to get a bunch of additional durability, it still is a little bit dubious. Something you could maybe experiment with, though. Energy Drain. Energy Tap, by the way, is very similar to Energy Drain. Energy Drain is just like an elite version of it. Energy Drain is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 30-second recharge. Elite spell. Target foe loses 8 energy. You gain 3 energy for each point of energy lost. This is okay energy management. I'm going to give this a solid 3. I often don't bring this. Like, this is one that I have used in the past. The major issue with it is you're spending your elite slot on it. If you are bringing somebody with like energy surge and a bunch of those sorts of things, just be aware that you are potentially creating a conflict. If they're energy surging the enemies out of energy, you can't energy drain from them too. The enemy's energy is a limited pool. This will, like, if it's getting you the full amount here, this is 24 energy, which is a nice chunk of energy and a nice return. And this is a good way to do energy management. It's good to have some of these skills that are trying to take energy from the enemy. They add some interesting play that way. Just be aware of some of the quirks, like if they're out of energy, you can't get anything from them, that sort of stuff. Energy Tap, like I mentioned, is basically a non-elite version of Energy Drain. It's 5 energy, 2 second cast time as opposed to 1 and 30-second recharge. So Energy Drain is a little bit friendlier for non-mesmers to use, because the 2 second cast time will be pretty lengthy. Spell, target foe loses 6 energy. You gain 2 energy for each point of energy lost. So this is significantly weaker, right? This was both more energy lost and more energy per point lost. Energy Tap, this is only going to gain me 12 energy right now, which is a net 7. So it's kind of questionable. The fact that it's not an elite gives it some additional points. It's not the most exciting energy management, but it kind of works. I'm going to go ahead and give this a 2, though. I feel like... So at these respective levels, Energy Tap is gaining half the energy Energy Drain does. This is 24 and this is 12. I feel like that decrease is significant enough that despite the fact it's no longer an elite, the amount of energy gain from this is going to be low enough that I'm just going to look for other energy management options. I'm not going to bring Energy Tap. It's just not quite efficient enough. And part of the downside is the recharge being very long. To be clear as well, that it's also directly competing with Waste Not, Want Not, which right here you can see, we'll talk about this more specifically later, but this also gains you 12 energy, but it has half the recharge, an eighth of the casting time, and is potentially, like, this is hard to actually get off, to be clear, but half the recharge is pretty significant. So there are other options that are competing with energy tap. So that's kind of why it falls out where it does. Ether Feast. This is the main self-heal that Mesmer has. It is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 8 second recharge. Spell. Target foe loses 3 energy. You're healed 56. You're healed by 56 health for each point of energy lost. This is a 2, like most self-heals are. Honestly, I'm like, if you want to self-heal, this is a fine option. Like, this would heal for, what is this, 100, and let's see, that's 150 plus 18, so 168 health. That's a reasonably solid heal. The recharge is pretty low, especially with fast casting. Of course, they do have to have energy. If they don't have energy, you're getting less health. But I mean, it's an okay self-heal. It's going to be for a solid chunk. But the main issue here is, frankly, that you have better things to spend your skill slots on than healing yourself most of the time. So, Ether Lord. This one sounds really cool, and the icon's sweet. Like, look at that cool cloaked figure. Looks really cool. So Ether Lord is 5 energy, 2 second cast time, 20 second recharge, Hex spell. You lose all energy. Well, that's a bad way to start. For 9 seconds, target foe suffers -3 energy degeneration, and you experience +3 energy regeneration. Okay. Do not use this if you have above, like, 7 energy, because you're just spending so much. Let's look at the actual energy. So 3 energy degen means that they're losing 9 energy, and you are gaining 9 energy, because 3 is one pip is a third of an energy per second, so 3 pips isn't 1 energy per second. When in this last 9 seconds, that's what's happening. So you need to, like, this thing needs to last the entire time, and this will net lose them over the course of those 9 seconds. It will net lose them 9 energy and net gain you 9 energy. Need I remind you that energy tap will lose them 6 energy and gain you 12, and not cost all of your energy to apply it. So here's one of the things I think is a serious problem that this game has in general when it comes to energy stuff, is it treats energy regeneration as being worth more than it is. Energy regeneration is just not worth that much, per se. This is a really prime example of it. Oh, 3 pips of energy degeneration on them and 3 pips on you. Sounds really good, but this would only be mildly okay if it didn't cost you all of your energy, and the fact that it costs you all of your energy makes this extremely dubious at best. You are paying all of your energy, at minimum of 5, and then however much energy you have, for the privilege of depriving your opponent of 9 energy and gaining 9 energy. Let that sink in for a moment. This is a 1. The spell is bad. It would barely be okay if you didn't lose all energy. The fact that you do just makes this awful. It's the exact same problem with energy flux. Like, they have 2 pips of energy degen. If you remember that from Domination Magic. 2 pips of energy degeneration is not, like, it matters, absolutely, don't get me wrong. But for the amount of time it lasts, it's just not that much energy, relatively speaking. So this is the same sort of issue. It seems really cool, and it looks like your energy is going up quickly, but getting a big chunk of energy return from something like an energy drain or drain enchantment or an energy tap is just more valuable. So I'd rather drain enchantment than cast Ether Lord, because that's going to gain me more energy. Or I'd rather, like, energy surge. That's going to cost them, you know, the same sort of amount at least, and deal damage, things like that. So this sounds better than it is, for sure. Ether Phantom. 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 10 second recharge, Hex spell. Oh. Okay. For 10 seconds, target foe has -1 energy degeneration. As we have established, that's about 3 energy. If this hex is removed prematurely, that foe loses 4 energy. Okay, so this is meant to work with some of the, like, shatter delusions and drain delusions that have additional benefits on that. I'm going to give this a 2 because it does work with those. If you take like 3 seconds to get to it, it's draining 5 energy. It's okay in that regard. It's not fantastic. I would generally pick like the shrinking armor type stuff. This is a very marginal too. This is like a 1.5, but I'm not doing 0.5. So this is, I'm giving this a 2, but it's a rounding up to get that. Again, -1 energy degeneration, like, it matters, but it takes a long time to matter. So that's something that's just really important to recognize. Ether Cygnet. 1 second activation time, 45-second recharge. It's a Cygnet. If you have less than 9 energy, you gain 18 energy. Woohoo! So what's really important to recognize about this is when this says you gain 18 energy, it means it. So a lot of the stuff that gives you energy, like, it has, like, an initial cost, right? Like, Ether Tap. You have to spend 5 energy to gain 12. Here, this doesn't, because it's a Cygnet, it doesn't cost you any energy to use. So because of that, this right here is actually gaining you 18 energy, and it's a net 18, so that's actually more than it sounds like. I'm going to give this a 3. And the reason why is because, like, it gives you a huge amount of raw energy. The recharge is very long on it, and it's very long precisely because it gains you a huge amount of energy. You do have to, of course, be low on energy to make a good use of it. But, I mean, that's the time when you want that energy anyway. It should be added that this works really well with Quickening Zephyr, which is a ranger skill that just affects everyone and makes skills recharge, half the time, but cost 30% more energy. Well, if this is recharging in half the time, you can use it twice as often, and this becomes significantly stronger in the presence of Quickening Zephyr, just because the amount of energy gain that you get from this is doubled. So even though you're spending more energy, you're able to get a lot more energy back out of Ether Cygnet. Just a synergy to keep in mind. Extend conditions. 5 energy, 1/4 second cast time, 5 second recharge, elite spell. Spread all conditions from target foe to all foes near your target. The durations of those conditions are increased by 81%, maximum of 30 seconds. I would not generally bring this in. It's a 2. I don't think this is a bad skill. There are times when I can see using this. If you have, for example, some way of non-elitely applying Dazed, or if you know Dazed is getting spread around, this is a good way of spreading it. It should be noted that there is a no attributes skill that does a very similar thing called Epidemic. Epidemic, however, is a smaller range. It's adjacent, and it does not increase the duration. Increasing the duration is actually a very powerful part of Extend Conditions. And this is near your target, not just adjacent to, so this is a bigger area of effect. So it is a sizable increase, but it's an elite, and the thing is, I'm generally going to want Fevered Dreams over this, because Fevered Dreams, like, it spreads better, if that makes sense. But this is definitely an option, and the fact that it increases the duration could be nice if you're trying to use conditions as a pressure rather than a fragility build. And then extending the duration also matters a lot more. So just some things to consider. There are some situations where you might want it, but spending your elite slot on it is a little questionable. Feedback. 10 energy, 2 second cast time, 30 second recharge, spell. Target foe loses 1 enchantment. If an enchantment is removed in this way, that foe also loses 9 energy. This is another one of those, like, energy, or, like, okay, so this is a 2. The reason why this is a 2 for me is because 2 second cast time, 30 second recharge is pretty long for enchantment removal. And the benefit that you're getting out of this, of draining them for energy, is typically irrelevant in PvE. If you're not getting a benefit from it, if you're not trying to go super hardcore into energy denial type builds, which, to be clear, are a bit dubious in PvE in the first place. I know I liked Fear Me a lot, but like, some energy denial stuff can be beneficial, but this is not what I'm looking for. You really need fast casting to make this at all palatable, which, I mean, you have. But even with that, let's be blunt here. The effect of, like, them losing 9 energy is probably not going to be worth making this take longer. Hex Eater Cygnet. Okay, so this is a 1-second activation time, 25-second recharge Cygnet. Cygnet, target touched ally and up to 4 adjacent allies each lose 1 hex. You gain 3 energy for each hex removed this way. So your allies do have to bunch up. This is an okay form of hex removal that also doubles as energy management. Note that any energy you gain from this is just raw gain. It doesn't cost, because this doesn't cost anything, and it is energy-free hex removal. I could see running this on like a monk or something for some energy management in areas where there's a lot of hexes flying around. This is a reasonable way to try to clean some of that up, but yeah. Note that this is up to 5 allies, if I understand right. Target touched ally and up to 4 adjacent allies. So at most, this is gaining you 15 energy. It's okay. I'm going to give this a 3, just because it's doing 2 useful things, removing hexes in an AoE and gaining you energy. 25-second recharge is kind of long, but the fact that it doesn't cost any energy is a pretty big boon. Only has 1-second activation time, which is nice and quick. So it's kind of an okay spot to be in, I suppose. I do like this sort of design, and I appreciate that there's a Cygnet that does this, and it gives you that option of handling hexes in this way. The areas where you're encountering a lot of hexes being spread around are, like, you'll find them, but they're not necessarily the most common thing. Usually it's going to be an area that has, like, a bunch of life siphon, like, basically a lot of necromancers that are spreading hexes. So this is something to be aware of, potentially wanting to bring if you're going into one of those areas. It's a little questionable to just throw it onto a bar, but if you know you're going into an area with hexes, I think that this is good enough to, like, definitely keep in consideration. But there's a lot of times where it's just, it's okay. Inspired Enchantment. Now, before I talk about Inspired Enchantment, I need to talk about Revealed Enchantment, because they are the same skill. This is another one of those factions duplicates, both Inspired Hex and Inspired Enchantment. So, Inspired and Revealed Enchantment and Inspired and Revealed Hex. I'll talk about the Hex version later. What this does are these 2 skills. They're 10 energy, 1-second cast time. They don't have a recharge. The reason for this will become clear in a moment. Spell. Remove an enchantment from target foe and gain 13 energy. For 20 seconds, Inspired Enchantment is replaced with the enchantment removed from target foe. Now, this effectively means that it has a 20-second recharge. As soon as it changes back to itself, the recharge is up. There is some dubious benefit of if they don't have an enchantment on them, you can just keep casting this. I don't know what situation you're in that you're wanting to do that, but, I mean, technically you can. Like I said, Revealed Enchantment is the exact same skill because factions had duplicates. I don't care for these. These are 2s. Both Inspired Enchantment and Revealed Enchantment, because, again, they're the same skill. The reason why is I can see running them on some sort of Cygnet of Illusions build where you're able to actually get attribute points, like use the enchantment with attribute points. The thing is, you're most likely removing a monk enchantment or like an attunement or something. Removing an attunement with this is completely worthless. Removing a monk enchantment can be beneficial if you have the attribute points to make it worthwhile. This is very dubious energy management. You're spending a lot of initial energy on it. So you're net gaining 3. Gaining 3 energy and having your, like, basically, you should never be using this for energy management over Drain Enchantment, because Drain Enchantment's gain has a much higher net gain of energy and recharges faster, because this recharges in 20 seconds, effectively, because it becomes another spell. Whereas, and that does not benefit from the recharge benefit of fast casting, whereas Drain Enchantment does. So I just generally would not use these unless you're doing some sort of weird, quirky, I take my opponent's spells and use them against them, wahaha type Cygnet of Illusion build, which I guess you can. but it's questionable. Inspired Hex and, again, Revealed Hex. These are also the same spell. Again, like I said, faction stuff. So these are 5 energy, 1 second cast time. These are very similar to the enchantment version. They're spells. They remove a hex from target ally, and you gain 9 energy. For 20 seconds, Revealed Hex or Inspired Hex is replaced with the hex that was removed. I believe that this was sometimes used as very dubious energy management on monks. It is technically hex removal, which is nice. It has 20-second recharge, though, which is long. This is... I would actually say that these are mildly better than the Revealed/Inspired Enchantment. For the sole reason that I feel like it's mildly more useful along with, like, one of the probably energy drain. Yeah, energy drain. On like a monk or something. In general, Inspired Hex will be better as well on a Mesmer, just because Mesmers have a lot of the hexes in the game, along with Necromancers, so there's a higher % chance that you're going to remove something that you're going to be able to make use of, which obviously is a nice benefit. So I'm going to give these 3s, just because I feel like they're mildly more playable. That said, I would generally not run them, but I think that they are better than the enchantment, their enchantment counterparts, in my opinion. Lower initial upfront cost, and technically a little bit more energy gain, and potentially more useful. I would be very wary about giving this to the AI, though, because you never know if the AI is going to be like, oh yeah, I'm a monk and I just took Conjure Phantasm. I should cast that. Because you don't want a monk to cast Conjured Phantasm off of no illusion magic. It's going to be bad. Leech Cygnet. 1/4 second activation time, 30-second recharge. It is a Cygnet. Interrupt target foe's action. If that action was a spell, you gain 13 energy. This one's pretty reasonable. It's a popular way to get energy management and a little bit of disruption without having to invest energy in the first place. 30 seconds is kind of lengthy recharge, but it's the price you pay for energy management skills that also interrupt foes' actions, but also have to interrupt foes' actions. This does interrupt any action, but only spells gain you energy. So I feel like Leech Signet is kind of a solid 3 for me. It's certainly a skill I consider bringing sometimes. I think I probably bring Power Drain, which you can see down here at the bottom, a bit more often. You might be able to see why. We'll talk about it when we get to it. But Leech Signet is fine and can be a good part of a Cygnet build. Lissas Aura. So this is 5 energy, 1 second cast time, 30-second recharge. Elite enchantment spell. For 10 seconds, you have +4 energy regeneration. This enchantment reapplies itself every time you cast a spell on a foe. This is a skill that I feel like I want to experiment around with more than I have. It's very powerful energy management. +4 energy regeneration. Like I said, energy regeneration can be overrated. +4 is 1 1/3 energy per second, which, when it lasts for 10 seconds, is going to be, 10 plus, 3, so around 13 energy, which is not stellar, but the thing is, if you're casting a spell on a foe, this reapplies itself, so it actually can kind of last indefinitely in certain, in the hands of certain styles. So this can be very powerful energy management. The thing is, the longer this lasts, the more value it gains you, and the fact that it reapplies itself when you cast a spell on a foe means that 30-second recharge, it can last significantly longer than it appears at first blush, which does a lot for this. I haven't really used it much, though, and I think part of the problem is I just don't use Inspiration Magic a whole lot. I usually am relying on Necromancers to do the energy management for my party, so while I think Lissas Aura is powerful energy management for yourself, you're using your elite slot for it, and that, to me, is a bit questionable. So I'm going to give this... I feel like this is the sort of skill that deserves a 4, but I'm going to give it a 3 just because I don't use it. And like, I don't know for sure that it should be higher. I feel like it's powerful sounding energy management. I don't know if it plays out that way in practice, and that's part of what would need to be determined. A little bit of a question of, like, what time do you really want this? And part of it, too, is the skill is damaged by the way team building composition works, where sometimes you want to bring individual energy management, but sometimes energy management is something that's kind of built into your party. So, Lissas Aura, it's questionable exactly where its home is. And to be clear, part of the problem is, like, Elementalist would love this sort of effect, but Elementalist already has enough energy management that they don't need to dip into Inspiration Magic for this. Mesmer can make good use of this, potentially, but they definitely have options, and this is taking up your elite slot, and that's complicating things. So what other profession really wants this, right? Like, I could see if you have some sort of wonky monk build that casts a spell on foes to keep this up, that could theoretically work, but that's questionable. So that renewing itself when you cast a spell on a foe is a great clause for, like, allowing it to extend, but also is very limiting on who actually wants it. I could see this being used best potentially by, like, a ritualist that has some spells that target foes and some other stuff, but then they're dipping into stuff really weird. It's a lot more awkward to use than it sounds, is part of what causes this problems. Okay, now we're going to get into the huge swath of mantras. Most of the mantras here are going to be stances, and they do various things. So let's go ahead and talk about Mantra of Concentration. 5 energy, 30-second recharge, stance, so no activation time. For 31 seconds, the next time you would be interrupted, you are not interrupted. When it says the next time, this means that this ends. So basically, this means that the next time you'd be interrupted, you're not. 30 seconds is too long of a recharge for this effect. I would rather bring Glyph of Concentration in the Elementalist line. I believe it has a shorter recharge. I believe it's like 10 seconds. Mantra of Resolve is also arguably better if you have spells that you absolutely want to get off. I think I'm going to give this a 1, just because I feel like very rarely do I want this effect in the first place of preventing being interrupted, and when I do, I feel like there are stronger options. So part of the big thing that damages this is its recharge. If this had like a 5 to 7 second recharge, somewhere in that neighborhood, I could see being a lot more favorable towards it. But as it is, it's just a bit much. That said, I do really appreciate seeing stuff that allows you to have an answer to being interrupted. It's useful to provide answers to answers. And this is kind of like your spell is uncounterable in Magic the Gathering. Spells being uncounterable is a great way to respond to somebody using a lot of counter magic. And Mantra of Concentration kind of plays in that space. So I just don't think it's very effective at it. I think there are better options for that sort of thing. Mantra of Earth, Flame, Frost, and Lightning they all share the same model. I am going to rate them individually, though, because there are some peculiarities that kind of make each one a little bit different. So Mantra of Earth is 10 energy, 20-second recharge. It's a stance. For 78 seconds, whenever you take Earth damage, the damage is reduced by 45%, and you gain 2 energy. So this specifically, of course, requires the damage to be Earth. Gaining the energy is a really nice part of this. The damage reduction is really nice. Stone Striker, which is an Elementalist enchantment that converts damage that you take to Earth type, works really well with this. But you're putting in a lot of work to be able to gain defenses. It's useful in certain situations that are like farming builds and things like that. In general, the problem with most of these guys here, not Mantra of Inscriptions, it awkwardly comes in between, but the problem with Mantra of Earth, Flame, Frost, and Lightning, which all share the same model, right? It's just different damage types, is that you are specifically selecting a damage type to gain a lot of resistance against. So either you have to know that the area you're going into has a lot of that damage type, or you're purposefully bringing skills to set up that damage type happening a lot. In that regard, Mantra of Earth and Mantra of Frost are probably the most useful. from the standpoint that you can bring stuff to convert all damage into frost type, and you can use individual skills to make all damage that you receive, or most of the damage you receive, earth type. Using these is all very dubious. Just to kind of get it out of the way, all of the Mantra of Earth, Flame, Frost, and Lightning are all 2s to me. They are extraordinarily useful in specific circumstances. Some of them you can kind of build around. So, for example, you can use Greater Conflagration, which I mentioned earlier, to turn all physical damage into fire damage, and then Winter, another Ranger Spirit, a skill that Rangers can use, that converts all elemental damage to cold damage. That allows you to make all damage cold damage, which Mantra of Frost absorbs. So you can then bring Mantra of Frost and everybody to absorb, to have lots of damage reduction and energy management on your entire party. Mantra of Earth works really well. Stone Striker. Mantra of Flame, again, you can use it with Greater Conflagration, as I mentioned earlier. Also, fire damage is fairly common, and it's notably useful in Hell's Precipice, the last mission of Prophecies, where there are some incredibly powerful fire elementalists, and Mantra of Flame allows you to be able to greatly reduce the damage you take from like very high-level Rygorts invocations and things like that. Mantra of Lightning is similarly useful in areas where there are enemies that deal a lot of lightning damage, have Invoke Lightning and stuff like that. Margonites are a good example, and is specifically what I'm thinking of. So these can all be useful if you know that a specific zone loads up on a specific type of damage as a way of mitigating that damage and providing a bit of energy management on top of it. That said, it's all kind of narrow and a little bit questionable how good it is to actually use them. Mantra of Earth and Mantra of Frost are, in my opinion, the best ones, just because you can kind of force things to be around it, although Mantra of Flame is notably useful, like I said, on Hell's Precipice. Any area, if you find yourself getting roasted by fire damage, you can consider bringing Mantra of Flame. These are nice to have in your back pocket for situations where you find yourself struggling with an area that deals a lot of a specific type of elemental damage to give yourself a lot more additional durability. But you are, like, you have to invest, I don't know, like 10 in, let's see, how do they look at 8 Inspiration Magic? 8 is yeah, I mean, you're cutting out about 40%. They're easily 100% uptime. If you go up to 10, they're at 42. Keep in mind that gaining 40 armor is going to be half, so that's still more effective. So elemental resistance will actually reduce elemental damage by more than these do, with less chicanery to try to get, like, less narrow band. But gaining the energy is obviously nice. So yeah, they're fine. They're situational. I appreciate them as a sort of countermeasure and release valve. They're a little bit like Circle of Protections in Magic the Gathering. They're narrow answers, and let's just say if you are bringing them, you're bringing them to a specific area because you're specifically trying to deal with a specific type of damage that a specific enemy or group of enemies is dealing, or you're doing some special convoluted build. They're not general purpose skills. Mantra of Inscriptions. I touched on this one earlier when I was talking about fast casting, but this is 10 energy, 20-second recharge stance. For 21 seconds, Cygnets you successfully activate while in this stance recharge 34% faster. I believe the successfully activate means that this will not cause Cygnets that are interrupted to recharge faster. This is a 2. It's a very solid 2. If you are in a Cygnet build, this is probably a skill that you want. Just because making all of your Cygnets recharge significantly faster, 1/3 faster, is very strong. And so that's something that is very nice to have, and therefore something that I would consider in circumstances such as that. That said, this is not useful outside of a Cygnet build, so yeah. Okay, that brings us to, because I already talked about Mantra of Lightning, Mantra of Persistence. 5 energy, 15-second recharge stance. For 21 seconds, any illusion magic hex you cast lasts 34% longer. Well, this obviously only works with illusion magic. This is to make something like Conjure Phantasm last longer. There's probably some stuff that this is really good with. I could see something like Extending Shared Burden being kind of nice. Let's see. part of the thing is that this requires skills that you want to increase the duration of by that amount. So if we look at, like, the thing is, so a lot of illusion magic hexes are like one-shot stuff, so like clumsiness. You don't really want Arcane Conundrum to last longer. I could see wanting to make Fevered Dreams or Crippling Anguish last longer, some of those degen things. But honestly, so Mantra of Persistence is one of those skills that it's an interesting idea, but there's actually not that many illusion magic hexes that this works well with, and that makes it very narrow. And a lot of those hexes are just skills that I don't want to, or I'm not going to be using in the first place. This is, I'm going to give this a 1. It's probably like a 1.3, but, you know, I'm only giving whole numbers, so this is getting rounded down. The big problem with this, again, is that a lot of the illusion magic hexes that I like are going to be one-shot. Like, they're things that last for a very short period of time and get used up. So I don't need to extend their duration because they end very quickly. So this, therefore, just doesn't do much. And the skills that this does interact with are just ones that I don't like. Mantra of Recall. So this is an elite enchantment spell, as opposed to a stance like the other mantras. Probably, we'll read why. So it's 10 energy, 1 second cast time, 30-second recharge, elite enchantment spell. For 20 seconds, you gain no benefit from it, from Mantra of Recall. You gain 22 energy when it ends, which is why it's probably not a stance. It's a little bit too easy to just remove a stance and gain the energy right away. So this is a questionable form of energy management. It's net 12 energy, but you have to wait 20 seconds. I have seen this run on monk builds before. Monks have a skill called Contemplation of Purity that causes you to lose all enchantments on you and gain some benefit for each one removed. This works well with that because then you'll gain the energy from this. That said, it does have a pretty high initial investment. This is not my favorite energy management skill. It's an okay energy management skill. It's a little bit slow. It's a little bit clunky. I'm going to give it a yeah, I think I'm going to give it, like, I want to give it a 3. But if I'm being honest, I feel like there are other energy management options that are better, so I'm going to give this a 2. I think that there are situations where you can make this kind of sort of work, but it's just very slow, and the high initial investment of 10 energy makes it questionable. Like, energy drain is better right here. It also has a 30-second recharge, but you get the energy right away. And it nets you more energy because it has a lower investment. So Mantra of Recall is okay. But I think I have a little bit of a positive bias towards it just because of its usefulness, or the fact that it was used in some of those old monk builds. I think that there are better options for personal energy management. Offering of Blood is a good example. We will talk about that one when we get to Necromancer. And party-wide energy management, honestly, I much prefer like some of the Necromancer stuff like Blood Ritual. Blood Ritual is a very common energy management skill for me to bring. So, yeah, not a big fan of Mantra of Recall. Have nostalgia for it, but I don't think it lives up to that nostalgia. Mantra of Resolve. 10 energy, 20-second recharge, stance. For 78 seconds, you cannot be interrupted, but each time you would have been interrupted, you lose 5 energy or Mantra of Resolve ends. This right here is a really good anti-interrupt skill. Obviously, it costs you some, but 78 seconds is a pretty long time, so this is fairly low to maintain. Yes, it costs you 10 energy every time. The thing is, you're probably not going to get interrupted that often, so it's pretty rare that you're going to lose this energy. But if you really want to stop interrupts, this is a very strong way of doing it. That is a questionable use, so I'm going to give this a 2. Like, this is one of the... this is a very strong way, to be clear, a very strong way of stopping yourself from being interrupted. It's just that that doesn't come up very often. So there are situations where you might want to bring something like this, but honestly, most of the time you can just kind of work through the fact that you're getting interrupted a bunch, and it's just, it's not a huge deal. So, this, again, I appreciate that this solution to a problem exists. It's just that that problem is not necessarily one where I'm very rarely looking for a solution to that problem. I guess I could see wanting to bring this against Wind Wakers that tend to spam interrupts. Or at least I could see that being the case, but even that's dubious at best. Mantra of Cygnets. 5 energy, 20 Cygnet recharge stance. For 34 seconds, you have +3 armor for each Cygnet you have equipped. Whenever you use a Cygnet, you gain 49 health. Okay, so this skill has a problem, and this problem is that it is competing against Mantra of Inscriptions. Do you want your Cygnets to recharge faster? Yes. Do you want to gain a pile of armor and gain health whenever you use a Cygnet? Less yes. So this is if you have this skill on your bar, at most you can have 7 Cygnets for +21 armor, which is a nice chunk of armor. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not sure what your build is. I feel like this is kind of this is a skill that sounds more impressive than it actually is, because the thing is, like I said, the most armor you could be getting from this is 21, and Cygnets often have kind of a lengthy recharge, so you're probably not gaining health from it that often, and gaining health from stuff like this, again, incidental healing is good, but this is very clunky. I'm going to give this guy a 1, and the reason why I'm giving Mantra of Cygnets a 1 is because it is directly competing and losing to Mantra of Inscriptions. I have a stance that I'm using with this build, and it's Mantra of Inscriptions, not Mantra of Cygnets. That's just how it's going to be. If this was like an enchantment, I would definitely consider running it, but not when it's a stance. Physical Resistance. 10 energy, 20 second recharge stance. For 78 seconds, you gain +40 armor against physical damage, but you lose 14 armor against elemental damage. This is extremely dubious to me. I think elemental resistance is significantly better because there are ways that you can convert all damage types into elemental damage. You cannot do the same thing for converting elemental damage to physical. So this will have the physical damage that you take, kind of, but the thing is, that's important to keep in mind, is a lot of the physical damage you'll be taking, there will be armor ignoring chunks to it. I just don't feel like this quite does enough. I'm going to give this one a 1. I'm not impressed with this. I don't ever want to run it. I can see running the elemental resistance, but not this one. And the reasons for that are just like the nature of elemental damage versus the nature of physical damage, and some of the other things that you can use to mitigate physical damage. There's just better options. I'd rather be trying to blind the enemy, for example, or using weakness or things like that to reduce the physical damage that everyone is taking. So Power Drain. This is kind of a popular one. So this is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 20 second recharge spell. If target foe is casting a spell or chant, that skill is interrupted and you gain 25 energy. Obviously, you have to interrupt to get the energy. This is net 20 energy, though, which is a very substantial amount. This skill generally is a bit better than Leech Cygnet. Leech Cygnet does not net you as much energy and has a longer recharge, although obviously it can interrupt anything, which is kind of nice, although it doesn't get you energy unless it's a spell. This one, I think, probably is worthy of a 4. I don't actually bring it that often, but it is one of the things that I might go into Inspiration. Like, if I'm going in Inspiration Magic, there's a decent chance that I want Power Drain. This is definitely a stronger form of energy management than some of the other options. And in terms of the, like, power interrupt skills, this is also a pretty decent one. That said, I'm often not in Inspiration Magic. This doesn't always get on a bar, things like that. So, but you know, it's nice to have different interrupts with different sort of effects on them, and so it's nice to have that as a skill and as an option. Power Leech. Okay, so this is 5 energy, quarter second cast time, 20 second recharge. Elite Hex spell. If target foe is casting a spell or chant, that skill is interrupted, and for 10 seconds, whenever that foe casts a spell, you steal up to 13 energy from that foe. I don't know why it doesn't have a chant line on the whenever they cast a spell or use a chant, you steal energy. The interrupt thing is just kind of a side clause from trying to make sure that chants could be interrupted and trying to open up more options for that to nerf chants some. We will talk about chants extensively when I get to Paragon. They're the only profession that has them. We will talk about Paragon extensively when we get to it. In terms of the effect of Power Leech, stealing 13 energy from that foe is pretty strong. This is way better than the, was it Power Drain? The Domination magic one. That was... Where was it? Yeah, Power Flux. Power Flux is significantly worse than Power Leech. This is very punishing if they cast anything afterwards. It actually has some upside. I feel like this is a 3. I'm not typically bringing this in part because it uses my elite slot, but I certainly wouldn't be unhappy to run this. And I feel like there are times where this can gain you startling amounts of energy. 20-second recharge is a little bit on the longer side for an interrupt, but that's just because it's a hex that has a really potent effect. And stealing a bunch of energy from the foe whenever they cast a spell is certainly strong. Obviously, you don't want them to cast a foe, but, you know, it's an option. I already talked about Revealed Enchantment and Revealed Hex, so let's talk about Cygnet of Humility. So this is a 3-second activation time, 20-second recharge Cygnet, so no energy cost. Target foe's elite skill is disabled for 13 seconds. Your non-Mesmer skills are disabled for 10 seconds. That non-Mesmer skill clause is that way non-Mesmers are less inclined to use this. Shutting down somebody's elite is very powerful. This is a skill, though, that I don't... Like, I'm not unhappy to use this, but I'm just generally not bringing it. The reason why is because disabling one enemy's elite skill is often not as substantial as you'd like. So this is kind of annoying to be on the receiving end of. It can be debilitating, but bluntly, this doesn't do as much as you want it to do. It just doesn't. So I'm not sure exactly where to put it. I'm going to give it a 2. It's most useful to stop like a monk from being able to be as effective in healing or something like that. But enemy monks are usually not using the most effective builds anyway. Very rarely would I actually consider bringing this in PvE, but I feel like it's just good enough edge out being a 1. This skill is substantially stronger in PvP, of course, where disabling an enemy monk's healing elite is usually extremely powerful. So, yeah, that's... But, like, disabling other elites is usually significantly less interesting or exciting. So, Cygnet of Humility, cool effect, sounds stronger than it is. It's nice that it exists and is playing in that space. That's all I got to say about it, I guess. The non-Mesmer skills clause is a very ham-fisted way of trying to do this. I feel like a better counterpoint would be target foe's elite skill and your elite skill are disabled for 13 seconds or something like that, where you can specifically kind of build around it and stuff like that, but it tends to be really distorty. And I don't know, I just feel like there's better ways to kind of try to approach a downside to this that it discourages non-Mesmers from using it other than like your non-Mesmer skills are disabled for 10 seconds. That's a very ham-fisted way of doing it. Unfortunately, there's a number of skills where it's like, oh, this is really powerful when when a non-blank uses it, something other than this profession. So I'm going to go, we're going to go ahead and to counteract that, we're going to give it some really clunky, like ham-fisted way of directly addressing that situation. I can understand it. It's effective if aggressively inelegant. So there it is, I suppose. This would be kind of like saying, you know, doing something to stop your opponent from casting some sort of spell. Like, if this was an unskill, it would be like, target foe can't cast rares. All of your lands that aren't islands are tap tap all of those, and they don't untap during your next untap step, or something like that. Like, it's like, okay, so you really want this to go in mono blue decks, I get you. And it just feels like there's better ways of approaching that, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Cygnet of Recall. The 1 second activation time, 20-second recharge. Cygnet. For 10 seconds, you have -4 energy regeneration. When this effect ends, you gain 19 energy. So this is an interesting one. On most casters, this is going to cancel out all of your energy regeneration. This costs you energy. Specifically, it costs you 10 times 1.3 repeating energy for roughly 13, 14 energy, something around there. But this is basically going to cost you 13 energy to gain 19. When you put it that way, it doesn't sound so hot, huh? I think that there are situations where this is okay, but while this is playing in an interesting space, it's actually just, it looks better than it actually is. It sounds worse than I don't know. I don't know exactly how to evaluate it. I don't really have a time when I want to use this. I'm going to give it a 2 just because it technically works. It does the thing that you want it to do. It does net you energy. It nets you around 5 to 6 energy. But meh. This is a very aggressive meh for me. Yeah. Very aggressive meh. There are better options for energy management, is all I'm going to say. Spirit Shackles. This is an obnoxious one to get on you. This is 10 energy, 3-second cast time, which is very long, even for Mesmers, and 8-second recharge. Hex Spell. For 17 seconds, target foe loses 5 energy whenever that foe attacks. So this is a really powerful way of disabling an enemy's attack skills, because that's what this basically does if they aren't using melee attacks. Note that this can actually be shockingly good against AI casters as well, because they still auto-attack. This is just triggering off of auto-attacks as well as like attack skills. So Spirit Shackles is one of the stronger energy denial skills in the game, just because if they do attack, like, they are draining their energy so fast. If this is on you, you can suddenly just wonder where all of your energy went. The problem with this is, as I have established, energy denial type stuff is just not that strong of a PvE strategy. So this is good at that strategy, but that strategy is just not terribly exciting. So I'm going to give this a 2. I'm generally, like, I'm not running this unless I'm getting benefit from the fact that their energy is going to be 0. And that requires the specific circumstances that cause their energy to become 0. And, like, to benefit off of that. So if I'm making a team build that's doing that, Spirit Shackles is actually a skill to consider for that. I'm just not making that build. That's the problem with it. But it might be fun to experiment around with sometime, eh? Spirit of Failure. This is actually, fun fact, a counterpart to a Necromancer Hex, which is Price of Failure. We'll talk about that with Necromancers. But this is 15 energy, 3-second cast time, 20-second recharge. The stats on this are awful. It's very expensive, very long to cast, kind of a lengthiest recharge. Hex Spell. For 30 seconds, target foe has a 25% chance to miss with attacks. You gain 3 energy whenever that foe fails to hit in combat. Note that you'll gain, like, if you blind them and they miss because of the blind, you'll still gain energy. This is very dubious energy management, though. They have to miss with 3 attacks to get your energy back. It does decrease the damage that they do. The Necromancer one is Price of Failure, and it's very similar. It also gives them like a 25% chance to miss with attacks, but they take damage whenever they miss. That feels a little bit better than this one. I'm going to, like, this is about a 3 for me. The strength of making enemies miss is very high. The downside of being very expensive is real, though. The energy gain from this is pretty minimal. Like, keep in mind, a lot of enemies are going to be hitting... what's, like, sword attack rate? Is it, like, 1 attack every 1.33 seconds? Something like that. So, like, at maximal rate, that's 4 attacks every 5 seconds. So you're going to get net 3 energy every once per 5 seconds, roughly. So that's going to be 6 times that for 18 energy. So this might break even. Let's just say this: if this is your energy management, bring blind, bring blurred vision, stack things, because this ain't doing it very well for you. I'm gonna give this a 2. Technically, the miss chances is a benefit. It does gain you some energy to mitigate the cost. It's not great, though. I just don't think it's as atrocious as a 1 deserves. So, like, I could see myself not hating putting this on my bar. I'm just very unexcited to do so. Tease! This one has a great icon as well. It looks like an elf. It looks kind of like our one, actually. Tease, 5 energy, quarter-second cast time, 15-second recharge, elite spell. If target foe is using a skill, that foe and all other foes in the area are interrupted, and you steal 4 energy from all foes in the area. So this is an energy steal version of Cry of Frustration. And I believe if I have 10, yeah, that's 3 energy. Where is it at 8? It's also 3 energy. So this actually works pretty well at just 8 spec in Inspiration Magic, which is fairly affordable. Where is the... Okay, so 8 is the break point. You want to have at least 8 to get 3 out of it. Obviously, okay, so 11... Okay, so 11 is the break point to get 4. You can see where breakpoints would matter for something like this. So if you have weakness on you that lowers your attributes by 1, you could suddenly be gaining way less energy from something like Tease. This is actually potentially really powerful energy management. This is like Cry of Frustration / souped up power drain. I like this one. I'm going to give this one a 4. I don't think it's amazing per se. I'm not always going to fit it on a bar, but like in terms of elite energy management, this slots in really easily onto a bar, or can fit onto a bar and be very effective. And I think you can certainly do worse than to run Tease. I also like the space that this is playing around with. It's exploring things in a slightly different angle. I like stealing energy from a mass of enemies rather than trying to drain it all from one enemy. That to me is really interesting. I kind of wish that space had been explored a little bit more, of like stealing a little bit of energy from a bunch of enemies rather than a lot of energy from one enemy and converting that into even more, if that makes sense. So Tease is in a really interesting design space. The effect is solid. I like interrupts like this. And it can gain you a bunch of energy, and that's always really cool. And its stats are fine. 5 energy is a really nice buy-in cost. 15 seconds is a relatively good recharge. So I like where Tease sits. I would bring this a lot more often if it was not elite, and I'm already like, yeah, this is a skill I absolutely consider running if it's an elite. Again, the main problem is I just don't go into Inspiration Magic that much. Waste Not, Want Not. 5 energy, quarter-second cast time, 15-second recharge. I mentioned this one earlier as being a competitor with Energy Tap. This is a spell. If target foe is not casting a spell or attacking, you gain 12 energy. So, if they are using a ritual, that is not casting a spell. If they are standing there gormless, that is not doing anything. This is actually really hard to use because enemies are often either casting a spell or attacking. But if they're just running after somebody, that's a really good time to use this. So this is finicky. But as far as energy management goes, this is not an elite. It gains you a decent return. This is net 7 energy. 15-second recharge is pretty low for energy management skills. Quarter-second cast time is hard to interrupt, I guess. This is a perfectly fine skill. I'm going to give this a 3. There's some people who might give it higher, but frankly, I prefer not to spend... So, you have to put this on everybody that you want to be able to use this, and I prefer some of the Necromancer stuff like Blood Ritual for energy management, because that's going to help a specific team member. So, for context, Blood Ritual is an enchantment that gives plus energy regeneration to an ally. That, to me, is energy management that can help anyone who is low on energy, whereas something like Waste Not, Want Not only helps me. So this energy, the skill slot that I'm spending on Waste Not, Want Not is not helping as many, is not affecting as many people in my party as something like Blood Ritual does. And that's the problem that I have with a lot of these only help me energy management skills. They can be good. Having some independence can be really useful. I think that they can be fine to run, but you also have to recognize that you are spending a skill slot on them, and sometimes they're just not worth it. So your mileage might vary. I'm not terribly excited by waste not, want not, but I think it's an okay skill. I'm just usually not running it because I prefer other ways of managing my energy. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap up Inspiration Magic. So next time I'm going to cover no attribute and PvE only skills. Until then, everyone, take care and goodbye.